She was one of the most photographed women in the world. Yet when she died, barely anyone noticed. In an industry built on noise, Tatjana Patitz chose silence, and silence in the end became her loudest legacy. January 11th, 2023. In her California home, surrounded by horses and the quiet she had always chosen over fame, Tatjana Patitz died at 56 from breast cancer. The world learned of her passing not through tabloids or paparazzi, but through simple statements from those who had loved her work. The woman who had helped define the supermodel era, whose face had appeared on countless Vogue covers, who had walked alongside Naomi, Linda, Christy, and Cindy, slipped away as quietly as she had lived, choosing silence over spectacle even in death. The irony was unmistakable. In an industry built on visibility, on being seen and photographed and celebrated, Tatjana Patitz had somehow remained invisible even while being one of the most photographed women of her generation. "I never sold my soul to fashion," she once said. "That is my pride." It was a statement that would echo through the decades, a quiet rebellion against an industry that demanded everything from its icons, their bodies, their time, their identities, their souls. While her contemporaries dominated headlines with their glamorous chaos, the parties, the romances, the drama that fed the tabloid machine, Tatjana chose a different path. She chose horses over nightclubs, California ranch life over Manhattan penthouses, motherhood over magazine covers. And in choosing silence, she became something even more powerful than a supermodel. She became a mystery, an enigma, proof that you didn't have to be the loudest to leave the deepest mark. What if the real tragedy wasn't that Tatjana Patitz died too young, but that the world never fully understood what she was trying to tell us? What if her silence wasn't absence but presence, not withdrawal but the most authentic form of being? What if, in an industry that turned women into products and images into currency, Tatjana had discovered the only way to remain whole was to refuse to be consumed? To understand how a girl from Hamburg became one of fashion's most enigmatic figures, and why she fought so hard to preserve something the industry couldn't touch. We must return to the beginning, before the cameras, before the runways, before Tatjana Patitz learned that the greatest power a woman in fashion could wield was the power to say no. Tatjana Patitz was born May 25, 1966 in Hamburg, Germany, to a German mother and Estonian father. But Hamburg was just a birthplace, not a home. The family moved to Sweden when Tatjana was young, and it was in the Swedish countryside that she would develop the relationship with nature that would define her entire life. This wasn't the manicured nature of parks and gardens. This was forests and fields, horses and open sky, a wildness that matched something in Tatjana's own spirit. From early childhood, Tatjana was drawn to horses with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other girls played with dolls, she spent hours in stables learning to ride, to care for animals, to communicate in the silent language of trust and respect that exists between horse and rider. This wasn't a passing phase or a hobby. It was a calling, and Tatjana pursued it with the dedication of someone who had found her purpose. Could these early years spent in communion with nature and animals have laid the foundation for the woman who would later resist fashion's attempts to commodify her completely? The girl who learned to listen to horses, to respect their autonomy, to understand that true connection required presence rather than performance, was developing skills that would serve her well in an industry built on surfaces and illusions. Tatjana was a competitive equestrian, talented enough to dream of making it her career. She understood discipline, dedication, the hours of practice required for those moments of perfect connection between rider and horse. But she also understood something else, that horses, unlike cameras, couldn't be fooled. They responded to who you really were, not who you pretended to be. It was a lesson she would carry with her always, even when the fashion world tried to teach her otherwise. The path from equestrian to supermodel came through chance and necessity, not ambition. At 17, Tatjana's parents enrolled her in a modeling school. Not because she dreamed of runways and magazine covers, but because modeling could provide income to support her riding career. It was meant to be practical, a means to an end, nothing more. But when she attended the elite model look competition in Stockholm, something unexpected happened. She didn't win, but she was noticed. Scouts saw past the awkward teenager to the extraordinary woman she would become. Within a year, Tatjana was in Paris, then New York, stepping into a world that seemed designed to destroy everything she valued. Fashion in the mid-1980s was approaching the fever pitch that would define the supermodel era. Models were becoming celebrities, their faces worth millions, their presence capable of making or breaking careers. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and for a girl who had grown up talking to horses, utterly alien. But Tatjana had something her competitors lacked. She had an identity outside of fashion. While other young models were desperately trying to become someone the industry would love, Tatjana already knew who she was. She was a rider, a nature lover, someone who found peace in silence rather than applause. Fashion was just something she did, not something she was. That distinction would save her, even as it made her an outsider in her own profession. The late 1980s and early 1990s marked the apex of the supermodel phenomenon, and Tatjana Patitz found herself at its center despite never seeking that position. The photographer Peter Lindbergh had discovered her, recognizing in Tatjana something his camera could capture but never possess: an interior life, a depth that couldn't be reduced to surface beauty. She is the most intellectual and emotional model, Lindbergh would say, a description that set Tatjana apart from the gymnastic glamour of her contemporaries. In January 1990, Lindbergh photographed 5 women for the cover of British Vogue: Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, Tatjana Patitz, Christy Turlington, and Cindy Crawford. The image would become iconic, crystallizing the supermodel era. These were the women who would define beauty for a generation. But look closely at that photograph. 4 faces engaged directly with the camera, challenging it, seducing it, commanding attention. Naomi's fierce gaze, Linda's knowing smile, Christy's classic elegance, Cindy's all-American warmth, and then there's Tatjana, standing slightly apart, her eyes directed elsewhere, focused on something beyond the frame. She's present but not available, visible but not consumable. While the others seem to say, "Look at me," Tatjana seems to whisper, "I'm here, but I'm not yours." It was a quality that would define her entire career, that sense of being simultaneously present and absent, of giving what was required without giving everything. She chose silence, on the runway, in life, in death. The Big Five, as they would come to be known, represented different facets of beauty and personality. Naomi was fire and defiance. Linda was transformation and chameleon-like adaptability. Christy was classic elegance. Cindy was all-American charm. And Tatjana? Tatjana was depth, mystery, the one who seemed to exist on a different plane from the others. She was the supermodel who never quite seemed like a supermodel, the icon who remained somehow ordinary, the star who preferred the shadows. This quality made her invaluable to certain photographers, particularly Lindbergh and Herb Ritz, who understood that great fashion photography required models who could convey emotion, narrative, humanity. In Ritz's work, Tatjana appeared sensual but never objectified, beautiful but never merely decorative. In Lindbergh's images, she was a thinking, feeling presence, a woman with an interior life that the camera could hint at but never fully capture. "I was always the quiet one," Tatjana later reflected. "My beauty was never loud. It was an understatement that revealed everything: In an era when supermodels were expected to be personalities as much as clothes hangers, when their private lives were public entertainment and their every move was photographed and analyzed, Tatjana's refusal to perform off the runway was revolutionary. She didn't show up drunk to parties. She didn't date rock stars or actors. She didn't provide the drama that kept tabloids and business and publicists employed. Behind all that glamour, was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw? Or was there something else, a completeness, a self-sufficiency that the industry found both fascinating and threatening? Tatjana didn't seem to need fashion the way it needed her. She could walk away at any moment, return to her horses, her nature, her silence. That freedom made her powerful in ways that confused an industry built on dependency and desperation. The apotheosis of Tatjana's career came in 1990 with George Michael's Freedom 90 music video. Directed by David Fincher, featuring the Big Five lip-syncing to Michael's anthem about breaking free from image and expectation, the video became a cultural touchstone. Watch Tatjana's segments carefully. While the others seem to embrace the camera to embody the glamorous rebellion the song celebrates, Tatjana appears different. There's something in her eyes. Not discomfort exactly, but a kind of prophetic understanding. She looks directly at the lens as if to say, "I know what you're doing, and I'm only here because I choose to be." In slow motion, her face fills the frame, and for those few seconds you can see it. The boundary she's maintaining, the part of herself she's withholding, the silence beneath the spectacle. It was, without her knowing it, a preview of what was to come. She chose silence, on the runway, in her relationships with the press, and eventually in her retreat from the industry itself. Was the success worth the price she paid, or more accurately, the price she refused to pay? By the mid-1990s, Tatjana was at the peak of her fame and the beginning of her withdrawal. She could command top rates, work with the best photographers, walk any runway she chose, but increasingly she chose not to. She turned down jobs that would have kept her in the public eye. She retreated to California, bought a ranch, focused on raising her son as a single mother. The industry was baffled. Models didn't walk away from success, especially not supermodels who could still command attention and fees. But Tatjana understood something her contemporaries were only beginning to learn. That fashion's appetite was insatiable. That it would take everything if you let it. That the only way to survive with your soul intact was to set boundaries and enforce them ruthlessly. "Nature gave me peace, not the runway," she said. And it wasn't just a preference, it was a philosophy, a way of being. The horses, the open spaces, the quiet mornings without cameras or stylists, or the endless demands of maintaining an image, these weren't escapes from her real life. They were her real life. Fashion was the escape, the temporary performance she gave before returning to what mattered. The question that haunted her colleagues was whether Tatjana was brave or just lucky. Whether her ability to walk away came from strength or from some quality the rest of them lacked. Did she have financial security they didn't? A stronger sense of self? Less need for external validation? Or was it simply that she had never fully committed to fashion in the first place? Never surrendered to the industry's demands completely enough to lose herself in the process? The truth was probably all of these things and none of them. Tatjana had maintained boundaries not because she was stronger than her peers, but because she had never stopped being that girl in the Swedish countryside, the one who found truth in horses and nature rather than cameras and applause. She had come to fashion whole, and she was determined to leave it the same way. The later years of Tatjana Patitz's career were marked by a careful calibration of engagement and withdrawal. She worked, but selectively, only for photographers she respected, brands she believed in, projects that aligned with her values. She became perhaps the first supermodel to truly understand that less could be more. that the power to say no was greater than the pressure to say yes. Did this selective approach mark her downfall in the industry's eyes? Or was it a courageous act of self-preservation? Many in fashion viewed Tatjana's retreat as wasted potential, but Tatjana wasn't interested in being bigger. She was interested in being real. She chose silence. In interviews she declined, at parties she avoided, in the private life she guarded fiercely. Her son became her priority. Her ranch in California became her sanctuary. The horses she'd loved since childhood became her daily companions. She planted gardens, read books, lived quietly. To the industry it seemed like leaving money on the table. To Tatjana it was survival. "Nature gave me peace, not the runway," she said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Tatjana, the question was different. Could she maintain her light while working in an industry built on shadows and illusions? Could she be part of fashion without letting fashion consume her? The answer, remarkably, seemed to be yes. But the cost was constant vigilance, endless boundary setting, the willingness to be misunderstood and undervalued by those who measured worth in visibility and volume. She aged gracefully, another rebellion in an industry terrified of time. While other models underwent procedures to maintain their looks, chased youth with increasing desperation, Tatjana let herself age naturally. Lines appeared around her eyes, her face showed the passage of time, and she remained beautiful, not despite the aging, but because of it. Because the face that emerged was earned, lived in, real. Peter Lindbergh continued to photograph her throughout these years, creating images that showed a different kind of beauty. Mature, complex, deepened by experience. These weren't the glossy images of eternal youth that dominated fashion. They were portraits of a woman who had survived the industry with her soul intact, who had found a way to be both visible and whole. They were, in their way, more radical than anything from her supermodel heyday. Were these final decades acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? Tatjana had chosen authenticity over fame, peace over presence, being over being seen. In doing so, she had created something rare, a career in fashion that didn't destroy the person living it. She proved that it was possible to be part of the industry without being consumed by it, to be a supermodel without surrendering your soul. But the cost was high. She was less famous than she could have been, less wealthy, less celebrated. When fashion historians discussed the supermodel era, her name often came last, after Naomi and Linda and Christy and Cindy. She was respected but overlooked, admired but underestimated, the quiet one who never quite got her due because she had never demanded it. The question was whether this bothered her, whether she felt the sting of being less visible than her contemporaries. Those who knew her said no, that Tatjana had made peace with her choices, that she valued what she had kept more than what she had given away. But there must have been moments, seeing another campaign she'd turned down, watching her peers receive lifetime achievement awards, reading articles that barely mentioned her name, when she wondered if she had made the right choice, if silence had been worth the price. January 11th, 2023. The news of Tatjana Patitz's death traveled through the fashion world with shock and grief. She had been sick, but privately, maintaining even in illness the boundaries that had defined her career. There was no public battle with cancer, no Instagram updates documenting treatment, no campaign to raise awareness. She faced death as she had faced life, with dignity, privacy, and a refusal to turn her suffering into spectacle. The tributes poured in from photographers, designers, fellow models. Peter Lindbergh had died before her, unable to mourn the muse who had understood his vision better than almost anyone. But his photographs remained, testament to what they had created together. Images of a woman who was present but never possessed, visible but never consumed, beautiful but never merely decorative. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and fashion publications around the world ran retrospectives celebrating her work, her contribution to the supermodel era, her unique place in fashion history. The tributes were heartfelt, emphasizing not just her beauty but her integrity, not just her images but her humanity. She was the intellectual one, they said, the emotional one, the one with depth. But even in death, Tatjana remained slightly out of focus, slightly beyond capture. The tributes celebrated her work but acknowledged how little they really knew about her. She had maintained her privacy so successfully that even those who worked with her for decades felt they had only glimpsed the surface of who she really was. The mystery she had cultivated in life persisted in death, making her both more and less than a supermodel, an icon who had somehow remained human. Was her death as straightforward as reported, or were there hidden forces at play? In Tatjana's case, the forces were visible enough: a disease that kills too many women, a body pushed for decades by the demands of fashion, perhaps weakened by years of restriction and pressure that models of her era endured. But there was also something else: a life lived on her own terms, a refusal to surrender to industry demands, a preservation of self that came at the cost of maximum visibility and success. The irony of breast cancer taking her was not lost on observers. The industry that had commodified women's bodies, that had turned them into objects for visual consumption, had perhaps contributed to the disease that killed one of its greatest practitioners. Whether through stress, diet requirements, the physical demands of constant travel and performance, or simply bad luck, Tatjana had paid the ultimate price for beauty. Her funeral was private, attended by family and close friends held far from the cameras and chaos of the fashion world. She was buried near her ranch, near the horses she had loved more than any runway, in the nature that had given her peace when fashion offered only noise. On a hillside overlooking grasslands where her horses grazed, a simple marker was placed. No flashbulbs, no crowds. Just quiet earth and open sky, the element she'd chosen over everything the industry had offered. It was the final act of a life lived on her own terms. She chose silence, in the way she died as in the way she lived, maintaining to the end her refusal to turn private suffering into public spectacle. The legacy she left was complex, contested, incomplete. To some, she was proof that you could survive fashion with your soul intact, that boundaries and self-preservation were possible even in an industry designed to consume everything. To others, she was a cautionary tale about the cost of refusing to play the game, about leaving money and fame on the table, about being the quiet one in a world that rewards volume. But perhaps the most significant part of her legacy was what she represented: an alternative path through fashion, a way of being in the industry without being destroyed by it. While her contemporaries had given everything to the camera and had to rebuild themselves afterward, Tatjana had given only what she chose, maintaining always some essential core that fashion couldn't touch. She had been the silent supermodel, the eternal muse, the one who proved that you could be seen without surrendering, visible without being consumed. Fashion has changed dramatically since Tatjana's heyday, but the fundamental dynamics she navigated remain. Models are still expected to give everything, to be available always, to turn their lives into content and their bodies into products. The technology has changed. Now it's Instagram and TikTok instead of magazine covers and runway shows. But the essential transaction remains the same: visibility in exchange for selfhood, fame at the cost of authenticity. Tatjana Patitz showed that another way was possible, that you could say no, could maintain boundaries, could preserve something of yourself even while being one of the most photographed women in the world. But she also showed how difficult that path was, how much it cost in terms of fame and recognition, How easy it was to be overlooked when you refused to be loud. The question her life poses is this: what are we willing to sacrifice for success, and what are we unwilling to give away? Can we maintain our authenticity while pursuing achievement? Can we be visible without being consumed? Can we give what's required without giving everything? Tatjana's answer was yes, but barely and only with constant vigilance, endless boundary setting, and the willingness to be less famous, less celebrated, less visible than she might have been. In the years since her death, there has been renewed interest in Tatjana's work, a recognition that she represented something valuable that fashion had underestimated. Young models cite her as an inspiration, pointing to her refusal to compromise, her maintenance of privacy, her insistence on being more than just a face. Fashion historians are reassessing her contribution, recognizing that the quiet one, the one who seemed less present, might have been the most important of all. Because Tatjana Patitz proved that silence could be powerful, that absence could create presence, that the act of withholding could be more significant than the act of giving. She showed that in an industry built on visibility and consumption, the most radical thing you could do was remain invisible, unreachable, fundamentally yourself. Her photographs remain, in museums, in archives, in the collective memory of fashion. Peter Lindbergh's images of her are considered masterpieces, capturing something essential about beauty, about presence, about the possibility of being seen without being possessed. The Freedom 90 video is still watched by millions, and Tatjana's segments still carry that quality of someone who is there but not there, participating but not surrendering. But more than the images, what remains is the example. A woman who walked through the fire of fame and emerged intact, who maintained her humanity in an industry designed to strip it away, who proved that you could be both a supermodel and a whole person, as long as you were willing to pay the price of being misunderstood, underestimated, and less visible than you might have been. "I never sold my soul to fashion," Tatjana had said. "That is my pride." In the end, that statement became her epitaph, her legacy, her gift to everyone who came after. She kept her soul, even when fashion wanted to buy it. She maintained her truth, even when the industry demanded performance. She chose silence, on the runway, in life, in death, and proved that silence could be its own kind of power. Tatjana Patitz proved you could be visible without being consumed, but she also showed the cost. She was less famous than she could have been, less wealthy, less celebrated. When fashion historians discussed the supermodel era, her name often came last. She was respected but overlooked, admired but underestimated, the quiet one who never quite got her due because she had never demanded it. Yet perhaps this underestimation was itself a kind of protection, a final boundary she maintained even in the historical record. By refusing to demand recognition, by choosing to be undervalued rather than overexposed, Tatjana preserved something that her more famous contemporaries struggled to keep, a sense of self that existed independently of public perception. She understood what many discovered too late, that in fashion, visibility and vulnerability are inseparable, that every photograph takes something you can never get back, that fame is a bargain where you trade pieces of your soul for pieces of paper with your face on them. The economics of her choice are worth examining. When Tatjana turned down campaigns in the 1990s, when she said no to lucrative contracts that would have required more of her time, more of her presence, more of her life, she was making a calculation that few in the industry understood. She was valuing her time with her son, her mornings with horses, her quiet evenings reading, her ability to be fully present in her own life rather than always performing for others. She was choosing richness of experience over richness of bank account, depth of connection over breadth of fame. This wasn't naivety or lack of ambition. It was radical clarity about what mattered. Tatjana had seen what happened to models who gave everything to fashion: the exhaustion, the eating disorders, the substance abuse, the lost years, the difficulty of building any identity outside of being a beautiful object. She had watched the industry chew up women and spit them out, discarding them the moment their faces no longer sold products. And she had made a conscious decision to extract herself before extraction became impossible. Her approach to aging was particularly instructive. While the fashion industry has always been cruel to women who dare to grow older, treating wrinkles as failures and gray hair as professional death, Tatjana aged without apology. She didn't undergo procedures to maintain an artificial youth. She didn't chase the impossible standard of looking 25 forever. Instead, she allowed herself to become the woman she was, lines forming around her eyes from years of smiling at horses and sky, her face showing the marks of a life fully lived rather than carefully preserved. Peter Lindbergh continued photographing her through these years, creating images that showed a different kind of beauty, one earned rather than inherited, deepened by experience rather than diminished by time. These photographs were revolutionary precisely because they refused to participate in fashion's youth obsession. They showed that a woman in her 40s, her 50s could be as compelling, as beautiful, as worthy of attention as any 20-year-old. They were, in their quiet way, more subversive than any amount of public protest could have been. Consider what Tatjana's life looked like in practical terms during her California years. Mornings began not with makeup artists and stylists, but with feeding horses, mucking stalls. The physical labor of caring for animals who didn't care about her cheekbones or her Vogue covers. Her days were structured around her son's school schedule, around veterinary appointments, around the seasonal rhythms of ranch life. She attended parent-teacher conferences, not fashion week parties. She knew her neighbors, not because they were industry contacts, but because they were simply neighbors, people who lived nearby, who helped each other, who formed the fabric of a real community. This was the life she had chosen over continued supermodel fame, and by all accounts it was a choice she never regretted. Friends who visited her ranch spoke of her contentment, her groundedness, the way she seemed fully inhabiting her life rather than waiting for something else, somewhere else, someone else's approval to validate her existence. She had found what so many people spend their entire lives searching for: a sense of peace, of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. But this doesn't mean the choice was easy or without sacrifice. There were surely moments when Tatjana wondered about the road not taken, the career she could have had if she'd been willing to give more, to be more available, to play the game the way it was supposed to be played. She must have seen campaigns featuring models half her age and wondered if she'd walked away too soon, given up too much. She must have felt the sting of being forgotten while her contemporaries remained in the spotlight. Their names still mentioned, their opinions still sought, their presence still valuable to an industry that had moved on from her. The financial implications alone must have given her pause. While her Big Five colleagues continued earning significant sums from campaigns and endorsements well into their 40s and 50s, Tatjana's income from modeling declined as she withdrew from the industry. She had to budget, to be careful, to live within means that were comfortable but far from the luxury her fame might have afforded. She drove ordinary cars, lived in a nice but not extravagant house, wore clothes that were functional rather than fashionable. She had chosen a different kind of wealth, but that didn't mean she was blind to what she'd given up. Yet what's remarkable is that she maintained her choice, even when it would have been easy to return, to do one more campaign, one more cover, one more moment in the spotlight. The fashion industry would have welcomed her back, the prodigal supermodel returning, the narrative of comeback and redemption that magazines love to sell. But Tatjana understood that returning would mean surrendering the boundaries she'd fought so hard to establish, that one campaign would lead to another, that the machine would consume her again if she gave it the chance. Her illness, when it came, was handled with the same privacy and dignity that had characterized her later years. She didn't announce her breast cancer diagnosis publicly, didn't turn her treatment into a platform for awareness or advocacy. This wasn't callousness or lack of concern for others facing the same disease. It was consistency. She had spent decades protecting her private life from public consumption, and she wasn't going to change that pattern now, even when dying. One can only imagine those final months, the quiet ranch, the changing seasons, the knowledge that time was running out. Did she feel she'd made the right choices? Did the years of peace and authenticity justify the fame and fortune she'd walked away from? Did the time with her son, the mornings with horses, the life fully lived compensate for being the forgotten one? The supermodel whose name came last. The woman who had been one of the most beautiful in the world but had chosen invisibility? We can't know her private thoughts, but we can observe her actions. She didn't reach out to the industry in her final days. She didn't give farewell interviews or write memoirs. She didn't try to reclaim the spotlight or ensure her legacy would be properly recorded. She simply continued being who she had always been, the woman who valued authenticity over image, silence over spectacle, being over being seen. Even in death, she maintained her boundaries, protected her privacy, refused to turn her suffering into entertainment. But in our age of Instagram, of constant self-promotion, of lives turned into content and authenticity traded for likes, Tatjana Patitz's example feels more urgent than ever. She showed us that it's possible to participate without giving everything, to be successful without sacrificing your soul, to be seen without being consumed. The questions she left us linger. In a world that worships noise, is silence still powerful? Can we achieve success while maintaining our wholeness? How many other Tatjanas are out there right now choosing truth over spectacle? And are we paying attention? She belonged more to nature than to fashion, and in the end, nature reclaimed her. But fashion can never reclaim what she kept from it, the essential core of who she was, the part that remained untouched and unphotographed, the soul she never sold. That's her legacy, her challenge to all of us, to be visible without being consumed, to be successful without surrendering, to be seen while remaining fundamentally ourselves. Tatjana Patitz proved it was possible. But she also showed us the cost. And in showing us both, she left behind something more valuable than any photograph, the knowledge that some things are worth keeping, even when the world is offering you everything in exchange for them.